Hello and welcome to Lean and Leander. I'm your host, Andrew Naudine, and this is episode 18 of the podcast. It's also the 9th in the Vote in Leander series, and I had an opportunity to sit down with candidate Mike Sanders. Mike and I had a discussion ranging from some of his early influences, a little bit about his life, all the way to some civics lessons from Mike's perspective. He's done some things for the Republican Party here in the state of Texas that I've had some interest in and I wanted to know a little bit more about. And he was gracious enough to kind of educate me as to how some of that stuff works. Hopefully you'll enjoy the conversation. And while we're on the topic of voting, remember, if you have not registered to vote, make sure you go to voteinleander.com. You can find information on all the upcoming elections, as well as the information you need to get registered if you haven't done so already. Remember, you need to do that by April 1st in order to vote in the municipal elections in May. Now, we'll go on to the episode here. I hope you enjoy it. If you're watching, grab a drink, and if you're listening on the podcast, turn it up a notch and enjoy my conversation with Mike Sanders here on Lean and Leander. Hey everybody, I'm here at Mouton's off of 183 with Mike Sanders. Mike was nice enough to sit with me this afternoon in the continuing series of Vote in Leander. We're going to have a little chat. We'll talk a little bit about where Mike's from, some of the things that influence him, and hopefully give you, the listener and the viewer, a better understanding of what makes Mike tick. So thanks, Mike. I appreciate the time.
I'm glad to be here with you, Andrew.
Fantastic. I'm glad we were finally able to get together. I know it was a little bit of a challenge for a week or so, but that's okay. You know,
it's good that we were able to make it work out.
Yeah, you know, it's nice because now I think I've gotten pretty much everybody at this point. So it's like a little bit of a breath now that I can take in between each interview, because for a week and a half there, it was like every other day I was interviewing somebody, so it got a little crazy and hectic.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you being able to take some time and meet with me here. So,
Sure.
As I always like to do in the interviews, I like to let people know how familiar we are with each other, and Mike and I have never met before. This is the first time we've met.
Yep.
So
we never even talked on the phone.
No, it was all email and text. So, so we're here to find out a little bit more about you, both me personally and hopefully the audience at Lean and Leander as well.
Sure.
So, great. Appreciate your time. What I like to start with typically is kind of like, where are you from? So you and I were chatting a little bit before we started the actual video here. Sounds like you came from Florida to Texas. Is that right?
Well, not to Texas, but
okay.
I was born and raised in Florida.
Okay.
Yep, I was born in a small town north of Orlando, and when I was growing up in Florida, we didn't have air conditioning. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Florida, but it's kind of like Houston.
Did you guys have any swamp coolers? That's the question.
Nope.
Not even swamp coolers?
Well, actually, when I was a teenager, we got this fan put in the attic, and it would open up. When you turned it on, it would open up the vents from the hallway,
right,
and suck the air out of the house,
right,
and blow it out through the attic.
Right.
And that blowing all that hot air out of the attic made a huge difference.
Oh, I can only imagine.
But all through, that was when I was a teenager. All through my childhood, we didn't have any air conditioning at home. We didn't have any in the public schools.
Yeah, that's
there was nobody had air conditioning.
I remember growing up in El Paso.
Yeah.
We had the aforementioned swamp coolers.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't know what a swamp cooler is, let me explain it to you. Basically, it's a giant fan, like what Mike was talking about, except it doesn't blow the air out, it blows the air in. And it had these pads, like, I don't even know what they were like some sort of, I don't want to say it was asbestos, it wasn't asbestos, but it was some sort of filament that you would wet. There was a little pump and it would blow water over the pads, and so the air is sucking in essentially cooled air. But that's what passed for air conditioning in El Paso growing up.
So when I was growing up, we had no air. And I remember going to gym class. You'd take a shower after gym class, and you'd immediately when you got out of the shower and dried off, you're sweating again.
Oh yeah, no.
And you go to your classroom, and they have these rotating fans. You try to sit up towards the front so the rotating fan would blow on you at least part of the time.
Right, that's crazy.
That was my childhood.
That's funny. That's funny. Can't share that experience, but I know the hot. I mean, I get the hot because our schools initially they did not have. There was no central AC. I guess is the basic bottom line.
So from there, I joined the Marine Corps.
Okay. Was this right out of high school?
Right out of high school. Okay. I graduated from high school in June. I went off, beginning of June. I went off hitchhiking for the summer.
Okay.
I spent the whole summer hitchhiking. Back in those days, it was a bit different than it is these days. and actually got as far as Corpus Christi, Texas.
Wow, from
hitchhiking
Florida to Corpus.
And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to California or if I wanted to go to Mexico.
Okay.
But I wanted to go to some place that I'd seen on TV that I'd never experienced before. And I just went out thumbing rides and did that the whole summer long. And one of the rides that I got, one of the fellows that picked me up, he was saying, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. I was 17 years old. He said, well, what you ought to do is go join the military. The military will give you a good chance to figure out what you want to do with your life. It'll give you a few years to decide. So he kind of planted that seed in my head. And so when I, just before it was my 18th birthday, I was talking to my mom on the phone just to assure her, everything's fine, I'm doing good. And she was begging me, please come home, I don't like that you're out hitchhiking like that. So I went back home, and it was amazing. I was able to get home in, like 2 or 3 days. I was able to get all the way from Corpus Christi all the way to Florida just by thumbing a ride. I actually did something that I shouldn't have done. I bought a ticket on a Greyhound, and I got I think I got a couple hundred miles because that's all the money I had. A couple hundred miles on this Greyhound, and it was midnight, and I just stayed in the back seat and I pretended I was asleep, and nobody came back there to wake me up, and I took that Greyhound all the way across Texas, and I don't know where it dropped me off, somewhere in Mississippi or someplace, before finally I had to get off, and it way past what I paid for.
Oh yeah, no.
I was a bit of a mischievous kid.
Well, when you're that age, it's a relatively, unimpactful decision at the end of the day. They've still got to drive that length,
So then I got back to Florida, and that's when I decided to go into the recruiter's office after spending a week or two with my family. And I went into the recruiter's office, and first of all, I started with I think it was with the Air Force. And I went into the Air Force recruiter's office.
Didn't work.
And, so he gave me these tests. I forget, the AFSAB, what do they call it? The test that they give everybody. And I did really well on the test. And the guy says, you did excellent on the test. You can choose any field you want to go into in the enlisted ranks. Anything you want to do. And it all sounded okay. It just sounded pretty easy and straightforward. And I said, okay, well, I'll be back. And I left, and I started to go out the door, and I passed by the Marine recruiter's office. It was right next door.
I remember when they did that.
And the Marine recruiter's office, they had this picture of this guy in his dress blues, and he was all built, and it said the Marines are looking for a few good men. And I thought, well, I'll go in there and I'll check this out. So I go into the Marine Corps recruiting station. And sure enough, the guy in there, the recruiter, he looked sharp. He was really built. And so
you do know that's what they're supposed to look like, right?
I know exactly. Now I know what it's all about. At the time, I was 17 years old. Well, I was just turning 18. I didn't know. And so anyway, the guy says, he talked to me, and I told him I'd just come out of the Air Force recruiting station. He said, you don't want to be a flyboy. He says, if you want to be a man, you want to be a Marine.
That's funny.
And he said, how'd you do on your test? And I said, well, they told me that I could go into any field that I want to go into. And he says, well, hang on a second. Let me go over and get their test. And so he goes through the back door. They had a hallway that connected their offices, and he goes over there and gets my test results from the Air Force guy, a copy of my test results. And so then he comes in. He says, it's true. You can go into anything you want to go into in the enlisted ranks in the Marine Corps. You did really well on all your tests. He said, I got to tell you, you're kind of puny. He said, we don't really take them so small. And he was really in. And I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. I said, what do you mean small? I can do anything anybody else can do. And he just kind of drugged me in there. And next thing you know, I'm signing the papers. And I'm off to boot camp. And so that's when I first left Florida. So I went off to Parris Island, boot camp. And spent 3 months, I forget exactly how many weeks it is, in boot camp.
And you ended up in the 3rd Marine Air Wing, right? Is that correct? That's correct.
So out of boot camp, I was selected to be an electronics technician. I went to A school in Memphis, Tennessee, and then C school in Lakehurst, New Jersey. And I was trained to repair electronic equipment. I repaired closed circuit video equipment. I repaired HF, UHF, VHF transceivers, equipment that received satellite images, facsimiles, equipment, a wide variety of equipment that I maintained down to the component level.
Anything in like, and I mean, I don't know enough about the Marines to necessarily know specifically, so I'm not speaking from any kind of knowledge base,
Yeah.
but like armament equipment, things of that nature. Were you involved in that, or was it primarily the communications?
It was communications and radar, also weather radar.
Okay.
I was attached to the weather detachment.
Okay.
And every air base has a weather detachment. And my responsibility was to maintain all of the equipment that was associated with the weather attachment at an air base.
So did you learn enough to be a amateur meteorologist?
It was very, very. Most of my time were spent with weather observers, right? And the forecasters were officers, and the observers were all enlisted. Mm-hmm. And so, I saw how they would send up the helium balloons, and I worked on the little electronics that went in the helium balloons that they'd send up, and they would measure humidity and temperature, and then tracking. I worked on the equipment that tracked the weather balloons, and so we would measure wind velocity and wind direction by tracking the balloons. And so everything would be measured at different altitudes because there was an altimeter inside of the sensor that transmitted back down to the equipment that I maintained. So I spent a lot of time with weather observers and forecasters, and I learned that a lot of the forecasting is just guesswork.
Right. It is a little bit of this.
A lot of it is based on what has happened in previous years.
Right. Which is actually, I mean, it's funny that you would say that because I was kind of steering towards the snow. I was going to ask if you knew it was coming, that kind of thing. But we'll dispense with that bad joke. It's interesting because like on one of the local stations, they're looking at what happened in 2011 and comparing it to what happened in 2021 as to what kind of weather patterns to be on the lookout for, which I thought was really interesting. It's the first time I've ever seen, a meteorologist kind of do that and say, hey, we've kind of seen this happen before. It wasn't exactly the same, but if we look at that compared to what we see now, it should give us some ideas of what could potentially happen, which I think is pretty smart, you know, right?
And hopefully we've learned some lessons that will help us in the future.
Sure.
Things that we should have learned back in 2011 that we did learn, but we didn't take action on.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll take action
this
time to prevent those kinds of disasters from ever happening again.
I mean, that you kind of get into conversations there that are a little bit more like, well, do we want to spend the money or do we not want to spend the money? And, profit being what it is, and it's the driver in most businesses. I mean, I'm in sales, so I understand, hey, profitability is a big piece of the puzzle. And if you're not profitable, can't really maintain the business. I get that part, but I agree. I think it was enough of a pain point that the people who would be responsible for those types of decisions will actually encourage things to happen this time. And I certainly hope that they do.
So my first year in the Marines was spent in school, and then my second year was spent in Iwakuni in Japan. I took a course in Japanese. I used to be able to speak a little bit of Japanese.
Nice.
I know a few words still, but...
So you can still order at the restaurants?
No. I used to be able to, but no. I've also learned Spanish since then, and so now my mind is filled with Spanish, and so if I try to speak Japanese, I can remember some of those words, but the accent is more like a Spanish accent. So I've lost the accent. But while I was in Japan, I also spent a month in Korea, and then also in South Korea, and then after that was transferred to Southern California. I spent my last 2 years in El Toro Marine Base in California.
And that led you to Cal Poly, right? In
exactly,
San Luis Obispo?
I studied in Cal Poly. That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. I love saying San Luis Obispo. It's a cool thing.
That's the way you say it in Spanish.
So that's
San Luis Obispo.
San Luis Obispo. I love that shit. So Cal Poly is where you got your degree, right? Once you finished.
So Cal Poly is where I studied electronic engineering, and I became an engineer after getting out of the Marine Corps. I was an electronics technician, prior. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I went into engineering, and now that's been, over 30 years. I have to sit down and count how many years that I've been working designing circuit boards. I designed printed circuit boards, and my focus in the last decade and a half has been video circuits.
Oh, okay.
And so I design video circuits of different types. which is kind of where I started out. I started out repairing
Right.
video circuits, and now I design video circuits.
And are you a contractor, or are you?
I'm
do
a
you work for
contractor.
someone? Okay, so you
Yeah.
just kind of just. I'm a contractor too.
Yeah,
so I get it.
I work with a company, and
Find-
then
then find the next gig.
when that need is fulfilled, when
Mm-hmm.
I've done whatever it is they needed done, so they bring in a specialist to do things, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that they don't have enough people to do, and that's when they look for someone like me, and I'll come in and I'll design whatever it is, or solve whatever problem it needs to be solved, and then, you know, when that's done, then I move to the next company that needs help,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one thing that I found that really makes a difference when you're trying to solve difficult problems, and this is one thing that's going to make me valuable in the city council, is that you challenge all the assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when someone can't fix something, it's because they're making assumptions. And we all make assumptions,
Sure.
of all different kinds,
Sure,
in our
absolutely.
lives. But when it comes to solving a complex piece of equipment that's where hardware is interacting with firmware, which is interacting with software, and it's all interacting, and the software people are pointing their finger at the hardware people, and the hardware designers, they're pointing their finger at the software
Mm-hmm.
designers. It's something in the software. No, it's something in the hardware. You have to know a little bit about all those
Sure.
different things in order to be able to identify, yeah, the problem is in the hardware. No, the problem is in the software, or it's in the firmware. You know, and so I have to know a little bit about everything. And the first thing I do when I come into a situation where there's a difficult problem to solve is I start challenging the assumptions, and I start asking questions about this, what is being assumed. And sometimes people don't like having their assumptions challenged.
Sure.
But you know, that's what makes the difference between the person who's able to solve the problem and the person or people who haven't been able to solve it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair statement. I think that's very fair. I often refer to a similar, not exactly the exact same vernacular per se, but a similar approach, which is a growth mentality.
Yeah.
And for me, that's really important in looking at any situation, is just you have to have a growth mentality. And part of having a growth mentality is putting aside your own personal biases and being able to look at a situation and say, okay, well, let's just look at this. And
That's
I'm
right.
kind of a data wonk, so I do tend to go into the data, like, what's the data telling me
Right.
here? And then kind of superimpose that on any kind of, you know, conversational or problem solving that's going on about
Right,
that.
right.
So yeah, I definitely see where that type of approach can be very productive.
Right. You know, if someone designed a piece of equipment, in their mind, it's perfect.
Yeah,
'cause they designed it.
They built it. Yeah.
They don't know about their own mistakes.
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
And someone else comes in and says, "Well, why was this done this way?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, because that's the way I did it.
Mhm.
It's like, well, explain to me why. And you have to go in and you have to ask questions.
Sure.
You know, for years I've sat in city council meetings, listening to the city council members talking with developers and with vendors, and oftentimes I thought, well, why aren't they asking about this, and why aren't they asking about that?
Right.
And it was so refreshing when I saw Marcy Cannon get on the city council, that she began asking questions that I thought were great, excellent questions, really
Mm-hmm.
important questions, and they were being asked in public. You know, it's nice to, obviously, you want to go behind the scenes and ask questions of city staff
Sure.
and developers as much as you can behind the scenes. But it's also important for the public to be able to see that you're asking questions, and for the public to hear the answers to those questions.
I cannot disagree with you there. That's actually one of the things that I oftentimes will find myself in a similar situation. And mind you, I don't have. Let's see. You've been in Leander for 10 years.
Correct.
So you've probably attended a few more city council meetings than I have in my 3. Okay, but I think one thing that we would share from that perspective is that perspective. Like, well, where are the questions here? And you know, it's interesting because when you start talking to people and you get to meet a few, and I've met a few of the city council members, and I told you earlier, and I sit on the Citizens Advisory Committee, and Troy's who picked the people for that one.
Right.
And so I've gotten a little bit of a kind of an insight. It's a little peek behind the curtain, so to speak.
Yeah.
But you start to understand, you know, the inner workings and all of the conversations that are going on. So sometimes the questions that you might want to ask really, I don't want to say they're not appropriate for that particular venue, but they may have already been asked, and so you don't always know all of the situation as far as when it comes to the city council and the
Right.
public statements and things of that nature.
And for me, that's kind of important because even though if I'm on the city council and I've already gotten all these questions answered for me ahead of time, but the public hasn't
Yes,
heard those
well, that's
answers.
where I was driving with it. That's exactly where I was driving with it. Is I think it's really important that the public understand that. And when we say the public, I always like to quantify it. There's a group of people in any city. It doesn't matter where you go.
Yeah.
Okay. There's always going to be a group of people who are like hyper focused on the city and the politics of the city and stuff like that, and that's great.
Yeah.
Those people are involved, and those are the people who who will vote and will do all those types of things.
Yeah.
But it's the casual observer that I'm always concerned about. I'm concerned about the guy who comes in just because that's near his house.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Like it's not something that's necessarily affecting. It's the not in my backyard kind of mentality that most people have.
Yeah.
They really don't look at anything until it's like right there and it's affecting them.
Yeah, yeah.
But with that, I think if the communication is something that's clear on a regular basis, that as someone who's a casual observer can go and again, we live in an age where information is readily available.
Yeah, yeah.
So is misinformation, but that's a different subject. But if you can go and find what you're looking for, you can at least come prepared with some understanding of what the issue is.
Right.
And I agree with you. I think sometimes the questions aren't asked, or at least they're not answered in a public forum where people can understand it a little bit more
Right,
readily.
right.
And it's one thing to go in and do, go through the agenda and read the notes and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Again, that's asking a lot of just the casual observer. They're not going to do that.
Sometimes the agenda has 400 pages,
yeah.
600 pages in it.
I joke about it all the time. I'm like, if you're going to be on council, we'll get there. I'm going to come back to that, okay? But it's a lot of stuff to have to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So I know that you've done some board kind of assignments before. So I know you were involved with your board of directors on your HOA, and you also mentioned in your bio that you were a delegate to the state convention for the Republican Party.
Right.
You've served as an elections clerk and an elections judge. And I kind of wanted to go there with you because I know kind of what that does, what people do when they serve in those roles.
Yeah.
I wanted you to maybe share with the audience what that was like, what it was like to be a, let's see, what is it again? It's an elections clerk and an elections judge.
So there's actually a big need in Williamson County and pretty much everywhere for people to serve as election clerks and to serve as election judges. And what you do when you're a clerk or a judge is typically you're approved by either the Republican or the Democrat Party, and they try to put a mixture of people who represent the Republican Party, people who represent the Democrat Party. And the idea is that you want to make sure you have fair and honest elections. And so that's why you want to have folks from different parties. You want to have the Democrats looking over the Republican shoulders, and you want to have the Republicans looking over the Democrat shoulders. And so that you create an environment where people can feel, like it's a neutral environment.
Mm-hmm.
People can come in and they can cast their vote without feeling pressured or without feeling uncomfortable in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So the purpose of election clerks and election judges, first of all, election clerks, is to help people cast their votes, answer their questions, get them signed in, give them their ballots, help them cast their votes, and then and to ensure that everything is neutral, that nobody's talking about a party, nobody's talking about a candidate. Everything has to be neutral. And then the judges, their responsibility is to oversee everything. There's two judges in each polling location, and usually it's a Republican and a Democrat judge that's in each polling location. And the judge's responsibility is to oversee everything that's being done. First of all, on election day, it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. are the hours. So that's 12 hours. So the judge usually gets there at least an hour, hour and a half before that, and stays anywhere from 1 to 2 hours after that. Mm-hmm. So for the judge, it's not just a 12-hour day. It's more like a 15, 16-hour day. It's a long day.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And so you have to get a lot of sleep ahead of time. But there's a need. There's a need for people to volunteer as judges, as clerks. And you receive training from the Williamson County Elections Office. You attend training, and they teach you all the details you need to know. When you go in to vote, there are 3 stations that you go to vote. The first station is where you get signed in, and we used to use a laptop for that, and now we use, in the latest election, a tablet was used for that. And that's the only element of the system that's supposed to be connected to the internet. Nothing else is connected to the internet as far as we know, right? And so when people first come and they present an ID, a photo ID, they get signed in on the e-poll book, and then that is connected to a printer that prints out a blank ballot. Well, if blank ballot is fed in, and it prints out header information on the blank ballot.
Right.
So then you take that blank ballot with the header information, and you go to the next station, which is called the e-voting machine.
I think it was e-vote.
There's another name. It's not coming to my mind. But anyway, you go to the next station, and you express vote. It's the express vote machine.
Okay.
And you feed your blank ballot that has the header information into there, and the header information tells the next machine what are your candidates, because you can vote anywhere in the county, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you live in Round Rock and you vote in Leander, well, you can vote on the Round Rock City Council, but you can't vote on the Leander City Council because you live in Round Rock. So the header information contains what's known as a ballot style. And that ballot style information goes into the express vote information, and the express vote machine gives you a ballot that pertains to your voting location.
Okay.
So then you choose, make all your selections, and at the end it says, do you accept, are these all correct? And you say yes, and then you have to press the print button.
Right.
If you do not press that print button, it will give you back a blank ballot with only a header, and none of your votes have been cast.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to the third station, which is called a DS200 tabulator, and you feed that ballot in, you're not casting anything because you didn't print out your selections.
Gotcha.
And so it's very important when you go in to vote that you print out that selection on that express vote machine, the second location that you go to in the polling location, and that you look at your card and you see, these are the choices I made.
Right.
Look at your card. Yeah, that's the person I wanted for president. That's the person I wanted on this race or that race, whatever.
Right.
And then you go to the third station, and you feed it into the DS200 tabulator, and there the tabulator reads all that information off of the card, and it puts the information into a USB drive and a backup USB drive, and it drops the card into a bin that's located inside of the DS200 tabulator. And so those are the three stations that you go to in a polling location.
So the process itself, again, when you're a judge, what you're doing is really kind of making sure that those processes are consistent, right?
So
is that fair?
One of the problems that we had in our most recent election was that sometimes people got the wrong ballot style printed out. And so they'd go over to the second location, to the express vote machine, and it would present choices that were the wrong choices for them.
Gotcha.
They were being given choices, for example, for one race, and they didn't even live in that city.
Gotcha.
And so that was a problem that we had in our polling location. And we had to call, I called into the hotline. There's a hotline that you can call into at the central office, elections office, and I said, hey, we don't know what to do to fix this. And so the lady said, well, let me put you on hold and get an answer for you. I don't know. So she put me on hold for a long time, 5 minutes. When you've got all these voters waiting 5 minutes,
That's a long time.
And she comes back and she says, well, I went and talked to somebody else, and they don't know the answer either. We don't know what to do. We're going to send a tech out. So then they send a person out to your polling location. That person is called a technician, and that technician is responsible for solving problems of a hardware, software nature out of your polling location. And so it took about an hour for the tech to come out. Meanwhile, we only had one working tablet for a period of time.
Oh wow!
Fortunately, this was on election day in November. And if you remember what happened in November, most of the voting happened during early voting. On election day, we really didn't have that many voters, and so fortunately, we didn't have a lot of people.
A good time to have the problem.
It was and so anyway, the tech came out and showed us how to clear the problem, and we cleared the problem, and then once we cleared that, we had minor problems throughout the rest of the day. So, but up until that time, we only had one tablet out. One out of 4 of our tablets was working, and the others were all dead. And
it's interesting.
They were printing out wrong information.
I mean, again, I'm always curious about that because there's always a lot of conversation around voting and fair and free and transparent voting and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But outside of technical issues, it's always the conversations about voter fraud or whatever, however people will frame that.
Right.
Which, given any research, you can usually typically find that, maybe one or two occurrences, not a big, broad voter fraud thing. Whereas what you experienced would be probably a little bit more of what typically happens. It's really more of an issue with the programming or the software, or like in your instance, it was picking up something on the coding. I mean, it's all done with ones and zeros now. Somewhere along the line there was a one in the wrong place. And you had to clear that out, clear the cache, and it would reset itself.
So when the tech came out and helped us clear the problem and explain to us what the problem was, he said, you're not the only polling location. He said, this is happening everywhere, all over the county. And he said, and it's not just on election day. It was happening during early voting. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, no.
I was pretty surprised at that.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I then later after that election ended, and I was talking a couple of weeks later with someone else who worked as a technician in another area. She was telling me the same thing. She had that same problem all over the polling locations where she was going. And so I thought, wow, that's really not good.
Not a good thing, but again, something that could be addressed with the vendor. I mean, because the vendor would be the person responsible for that ultimately. I mean, that is how that works, right? You have a particular vendor who's been chosen to provide that machinery. They're giving you a guarantee that it's going to be, workable, and obviously it was
I have
workable.
some ideas of how the problem could potentially be solved, but and I wish that the elections administrator would take more of an interest in that. But I don't think that's really something to discuss right now.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so and I appreciate you going into that in depth because I think that's important, even just in the sense of giving people some insight. Again, to some of the experiences that you've had and some things that will, obviously influence the way you think. And also a great civics lesson. Because I don't think that a lot of people really recognize all of those things are happening on election day and otherwise. I think it's a great thing to be able to know and share.
It's interesting that you bring up civics, right? So when I was in high school, we all had to take a government class, and they talked about the Electoral College, right? And it was always this mysterious thing, what is the Electoral College? I didn't have any idea what that was. And all through the years, I've always heard this term, Electoral College. Well, yeah, the voting's been cast, but the Electoral College still has to meet. And I always wondered, well, who's in the Electoral College? Who decides who goes in the Electoral College? And how does that all work? And so it was really interesting that this, since I was a delegate to the state convention this year, I actually got to cast a vote for one of the electors. The elector from our district.
And again, I think that's also done in a similar manner as the judges and everything else for the state, right? There's a group of electors who are Democrat, and there's a group of electors that are Republican, right?
So in the Democrat, in the Democrat state convention, the Democrats choose their electors, their body of electors. And in the Republican state convention, the Republicans choose their slate of electors. And so there are two slates of electors that have been chosen, and whoever wins the popular vote in that state, their slate of electors are then sent to the meet together at the Capitol building and cast their votes, and then those votes are sent to Washington, D.C. to be certified by
and read into the record
over there. So I helped elect one of our electors into the Electoral College, and I was kind of supporting him, during when we met together, because we had a virtual convention, but a bunch of us met together during the virtual convention to be able to communicate with each other, and we met at a church, Celebration Church over in Georgetown, and I don't know how many of us there was, maybe 100 of us. I don't really remember, but anyway. So there, Paul Matthews was the elector that I helped, that I voted for, and so at Christmas time, I was sitting with him at the Christmas party, the Republican Christmas party, Williamson County, and we sat at the same table and we were talking, and somehow we were talking about the Electoral College. He was going to go and cast his vote, and he invited me. He said, "How would you like to go to the Electoral College and be there when we cast the vote?" And I said, "Are you kidding? Cool. I'd love to."
Yeah.
And so he said, "I'll get you a ticket." So he got me a ticket to go actually watch when the Electoral College cast its vote. And I thought this was, from the time when I was in high school, I'd always heard about the Electoral College, and it had always been this mysterious thing, and I had no idea what it was. All the way to the point where I actually got to sit in the Capitol building up on the
the spectators
area there while they were casting their votes.
That's
and
cool.
take lots of pictures of them, and that was just, for me, that was a thrill of a lifetime.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that would be kind of thrilling.
So you were talking about civics, and that just brought that to my mind.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
That's very cool. All right, so you kind of touched on a little bit, and in your bio, that you've done a lot of work within church boards, and you've done on elder boards and finance committees and stuff like that.
Right.
But what I found most interesting is that you mentioned you speak Spanish, or you're Spanish speaking, and you established some small parishes, it sounds like. I'm curious as where those were. Like, where did you do that work?
Okay, well, first of all, déjame decir que yo sí hablo el español, claramente hablo el español. Mi esposa es de Puebla, de México, y llevamos 27 años de casados. Y claro que mi español no es perfecto, como uno que nació tal vez en el país, en un país extranjero, pero sí hablo español y me gusta hablarlo, y en mi casa siempre hablamos español. Y necesito que voten por mí, los que hablan español, por favor. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, that's fine. Hablo español igualmente, pero yo no me nació en los Estados Unidos, de mi familia. Mi papá es de México, en el pueblo casi cerca de Chihuahua.
Ándale.
But that's really good, Mike. Your Spanish is excellent for someone who's not a native speaker.
Well, thank you. So I learned Spanish in Spain. I spent almost 2 years in Spain. I
studied more the Castilian.
I spoke la fe, la theta.
La fe, la theta.
Yeah, so I spoke what they call the King's Spanish.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife works for a company that is from Spain.
Yeah.
And the executives are all Spanish.
Yeah.
And it freaks them out when I come in, because I know Spanish. My wife doesn't speak Spanish, but I do, and I'll come in and we'll just have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking a Central American Spanish as compared to their Castilian Spanish.
Right.
But I've heard it long enough over a lifetime that you understand you can make the little inflections. You can change it just
if you know it's the C and the Z that you pronounce like a TH.
Yeah, it's funny too because it changes the cadence of the conversation.
Yeah.
I've found that. Like, Spanish is a really interesting language to me from that perspective.
Yeah.
I got on a different track here, but in like my experience has been obviously the way Mexican Americans or Mexicans speak Spanish.
Yeah.
People of Mexican heritage. El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, even into South America. And there's different dialects. It's interesting because there's these very, very subtle nuances to the way the language is spoken.
Yeah.
But then you get to Cuba and Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico is a very rich mix of the Caribbean influence in the language. But then you go to Cuba. I don't know if you've ever spoken with Cubans.
Oh yeah, I've got friends that are Cubans.
It's crazy, right? Yeah. It's like
much more.
It's easier to record their conversation and then play it back on slow motion so that you actually understand what they say.
Well, I understand.
But the Cubans speak a Spanish like they are racing to finish whatever it is they're saying. I used to do some stuff in Puerto Rico. I sold with a gentleman, and we would go visit Roberto Clemente Stadium twice a year in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
But we were dealing with Cubans.
Yeah.
And it was the funniest thing to me because I'd have to really listen intently because they spoke so fast. They were just in a race to finish. I don't know
Sometimes I have that problem. Sometimes people tend to speak really fast when they get nervous or something. And the faster they speak, sometimes it's like I'm trying to pick the words out. Sometimes, sometimes I have difficulty.
Well, because you think in English, and that's always you're thinking in English.
Well, actually, if you're thinking in English, that's where it's really hard. You have to think in Spanish. If you're trying to understand somebody, when I first was learning Spanish, when I was over in Spain, I was studying in the University of Salamanca, cursos para extranjeros, which means courses for foreigners,
expatriates,
Spanish for foreigners. And so when I was studying there, I'd have to think. everything that I had to say multiple times. First of all, in my head, I had to say the phrase in English. Then in my head, I had to repeat the phrase in Spanish, maybe a couple times. And then with my mouth, I had to say the phrase in Spanish. So everything I wanted to say had to be, first of all, said in my head in English, translated in my head to Spanish, maybe a couple times, and then said with my mouth in Spanish. And so by the end of the day, my head would be so
you get
tired. I would
it's
exhausting.
It's a strain. It really is.
It's just exhausting. And so I'd just lay in bed at night, and I'd just be exhausted. and I remember when I finally, somebody had told me, you know you've arrived when you begin to dream in Spanish.
That's interesting.
And it was so funny. In the first few months there, my dreams were just like what I was actually living.
Yeah.
Nobody understood me, and I didn't understand them. And that's the way my dreams were. I dream of people that were talking, and I was talking, and we didn't understand each other. And the interesting thing is, when you're in that kind of environment, you learn something. What you learn is how much of what people communicate is nonverbal.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure.
You can tell, even though you don't even understand the words, you can tell if someone is angry or happy. You can tell if they're sad. You can tell if they're excited. You can tell if they're trying to be deceitful. There's many things that you can tell without even understanding the words that someone is speaking. And so you can look across the room and see someone, and you can't hear what they're saying, but across the room you can recognize the nonverbal communications.
Sure.
And you learn, when you're put in an environment like that, where you don't understand anything anybody's saying, you become attuned to those nonverbals.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
I think that's fascinating, and what a great experience for you. I would love to immerse myself. Again, I'm a native speaker in the sense that we spoke Spanish at home, and my caregivers, while I was an infant, they spoke Spanish. Yeah. And one of the things that I did with my kids was, like, my nannies, or the ladies who took care of my kids when they were little, they all spoke Spanish. Yeah. And I instructed them, speak Spanish when I'm not here, or if I'm here, speak Spanish. Only when my wife is here do you speak English, because I wanted my kids to at least understand the tonation, or the intoned vernacular, if you will, whatever. I'm making up words. Right. But, I wanted them to understand Spanish from that perspective. And they both do. They can both sit and we can watch, a crazy example, like a telenovela, and they get what's going on. They understand it well enough. I get. Neither one of them really speaks it. My son a little bit more, but his is more like soccer Spanish. Yeah. So, he's okay on the field, but outside of the field, I don't know.
A lot of the words you learn there. I don't even know the curse words. I spent all my time around Christians when I was learning Spanish. Right. And so I remember one time this guy was cursing at me, and I had no clue what he was saying. Right. And my wife said, "Did you hear what he just said to you?" And I said, I don't know what did he say to me? She said, "I'm not going to repeat it." And I didn't get offended because I had no idea what the guy was saying.
That's funny. That's funny. I unfortunately know a lot of the curse words, so I typically know what people are saying to me. Anyway, well, this has been fascinating. I think it's been a real nice opportunity to kind of get a different flavor for who Mike Sanders is. And I want to give you an opportunity, as I do with all of the candidates, to let people know where they can find you, where they can find information for you online, and where you might be over the next few weeks as the election rolls around.
Sure. So you can find out more about me on MikeForLeander.com. That's Mike, number 4, Leander.com. I've got the red signs around town, if you've seen those red signs. And you can call me, you can email me. My phone number is 512. Well, I don't know how wide this is going to get.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to put your phone number on there. Let's skip the phone number part.
But my email address is msandersaustin@gmail.com. MSANDERS Austin@gmail.com.
Yes, and don't put in what did I do wrong on your email address? I kept spelling something wrong on there.
It's SAND, not SAUND.
That's probably what it was.
SAU is spelled Saunders.
Saunders.
And it's not Saunders, it's Sanders.
Yeah, okay. All right. So, Mike, thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. It was really nice getting to meet you.
Nice talking with you, Andrew, and I appreciate you doing this.
No, it was very interesting. I was fascinated by your storytelling. I think it was great. And again, like I said, I think it gives people a little bit of a different perspective on who Mike Sanders is.
Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate it so much.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining us. Again, as I always do, remember, voteinleander.com. If you want information on where you can go to actually place your vote, and up until April 1st, you can still register to vote. So make sure and do so. vote for your candidates, learn who they are. I've only one left at this point, so if you want to look at the Vote in Leander series on my website, on Facebook, website soon to be published, and it'll be leaninleander.net. So look for that in the next coming weeks. Again, Mike, thanks for your time, and we'll see you all next time on Lean in Leander.
Take care.